Good evening. It's Wednesday. We're back at Revelation. Thank you for being with our Spring Creek Wednesday night Bible study. We're praying about hopefully maybe getting started in person Wednesday nights, maybe sometime around September. So if things work out well, but pray for us in the meantime. And whenever we do start back in person, we'll continue to do the live streams. I think people are getting kind of accustomed to them now, and we're kind of settling into a groove. So we'll continue to do this, even if we do start back sometime in the next couple of months. But we're glad that you're with us. We're going to tackle Revelation chapter 7. It may be one of the top 3 or 4 most misunderstood chapters in Revelation, I think. And I'm going to show you why just a straightforward, common sense, literal interpretation is probably the right way to go. But if you remember, we're looking at a revelation that God gave about Jesus through the angels to John. God gave him this revelation, and it's about things to come. It is what we call the eschaton, the last day. Eschatology, the study of the last things. So this is eschatological in nature. It takes place in John's future from the 1st century, around 100 AD. It takes place in our future, 21st century and beyond. And so a lot of things John writes are going to be fairly simple for him. I mean, they're really understandable for him. He knows what he sees. He just doesn't have the words for them because it's so far past his time. And so in chapters 4 and 5, there's a scene in heaven. And Revelation switches back and forth. John is going to see visions and see things play out. And he's in a heightened spiritual state on the Lord's day. And so chapter 4 and 5, it's in heaven. He's in heaven. And in chapter 4 and 5, he is looking at a scene that's taking place in heaven where a throne is being set up. And that's the wording that he uses, that it's being set up. It's a temporary throne. It's not God's permanent throne. But there's a throne being set up for the sole purpose of conducting one order of business in heaven. And John sees all the colors. And we talked about the symbolism of the colors coming around the throne. And then it leads into chapter 5. Chapter 4 and 5 are one scene. It's one story. The chapter divisions are man-made. So we can't just arbitrarily just stop and say the story shifts. So 4 and 5 is one continuous narrative. And so John sees that God has a title deed of creation in his hand, a scroll that has 7 seals on the scroll. And he's looking for somebody worthy to open the seal or the seals. And John says, there's nobody here, nobody in heaven, on earth, under earth. Nobody's worthy. And John begins to cry. And God says, or one of the elders says, don't cry, don't worry, the lamb is worthy. And so John turns and he sees a lamb, not a lion, but a lamb having been slain, he said. Looks like a slain lamb. And so John begins to feel better because the lamb is worthy. The lamb takes the scroll. The lamb is Jesus. Jesus has taken the scroll, and what it is, it's a title deed, and that's the way they transfer ownership back in the 1st century with these scrolls that are sealed. And so John is seeing Jesus take the scroll from God, which is a transfer of ownership or a transfer of title. Jesus is claiming what he has redeemed. And then the scroll is going to be open, and it's going to unleash judgments, purification, cleansing, whatever word you want to use. But it's going to basically make the earth his. It's going to get rid of the ones and the things that don't need to be here. It's going to make things right. And so John sees the scroll, the seals start to be open. The first seal is a rider on a white horse, and it's the Antichrist. The second seal is a horseman of war. And this whole period is going to be characterized by war. As a matter of fact, John is going to see limited non-nuclear warfare in the beginning of chapter 6, and then by the end of chapter 6, I think it's going to progress to a full-scale nuclear war, and it's going to cause the sun to look like it's darkened, and volcanic eruptions, earthquakes that are on a cataclysmic level. But that's the second seal. The third seal is famine. And the fourth seal is death. And death is again going to categorize the tribulation period. And a quarter of the earth's population will die in those first six seals. The fifth seal is martyrs. The sixth seal is that terror that's unleashed by nuclear activity. And then the seventh seal. Now, the seventh seal is going to be the seventh of the seals, and the trumpets are going to be different because the seventh seal is going to open the trumpets. The seventh trumpet is going to open the seven bowls. And so what we're going to see in chapter 7 is what we're going to call a little basic break, an interlude, a parenthesis in the judgment. We see the first six seals that are open, and the Antichrist, war, famine, death, martyrs, nuclear activity with the terror and the earthquake. And then there's a pause, and chapter 7 is a pause. And chapter 7, as well as Psalm 1, answers the question that the angel asked or the elder asked in Revelation 6:17. Look at verse 17 in chapter 6. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand? Psalm 1 says the righteous man is able to stand, those that follow God, those that are righteous. Now in chapter 7, it's going to answer the same question, who is able to stand? When this great day of judgment comes, when this great day of the Lord, this unleashing of God's wrath on the world, when it comes, who is able to stand? So chapter 7 is going to talk about that. It's a chronology, or it's a parenthesis in the chronology that John is presenting. And so what you're going to see is in chapter 6, the first six seals are open. Chapter 7 is an interlude, it's a parenthesis. Chapter 8, there's going to be a 30-minute pause in heaven. What's going to happen with the trumpet judgments is going to be so unreal, so monumental. There's going to be a 30-minute pause in heaven. And then we're going to see the trumpets opened, and then the bowl judgments. Now, chronologically speaking, we're talking about a 7-year tribulation. The seals, those first six seals that we've talked about, are going to take up 3.5 years. So the first 3.5 years of the tribulation period, the Antichrist has a peace treaty with the Jews. The Jews think that everything's okay. And so those first six seals, chapter 6, takes place in 3.5 years. Then the seven trumpets are going to take place in 3.5 years. And so I told you it's a 7-year tribulation. So you remember the word that he used was entaki. They're going to come speedily, like a tachometer on a car. It's the first six seals are 3.5 years. The six trumpets are 3.5 years. And then those seven bowl judgments are going to come just in rapid succession in the span of maybe weeks or maybe months. It's going to be very quickly. So with all that being said, now we'll jump into chapter 7. And we're going to look at this. We're going to divide it up into a couple of sections. So maybe it will make a little more sense. But I'm telling you, if you read the Bible literally like it's supposed to be read, or figuratively when it's supposed to be figurative, or metaphorical when it's supposed to be metaphorical, then it makes sense. So we're going to read this with as much of a literal understanding as possible, that's true to the text. So look at chapter 7, and we'll start in verse 1. After this, well, what's he talking about after this? He's talking about after the six seals, after those seal judgments. He says, after this, here's what happens. In other words, this is a break. This is a parenthesis. He says, I see four angels standing at the four corners of the earth, holding back the four winds of the earth, so that no wind would blow on the earth or on the sea or on any tree. And I saw another angel ascending from the rising of the sun, having the seal of the living God. And he cried out with a loud voice to the four angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea, saying, do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the bondservants of our God on their foreheads. So John says that I see six seals open, six judgments that are opened on earth. And then before the seventh seal is opened, John said, I'm distracted by some angelic activity. And he says, I see four angels, and they're standing at the four corners of the earth. Now, in biblical interpretation, we tend to try to go by what, if you've ever heard the term Occam's razor, the simplest explanation is usually best. In other words, let's don't try to complicate things when it doesn't need to be complicated. And so verse 1, John said, I see 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth. Doesn't mean the earth's going to become square. That's not what he's talking about. He doesn't mean that all of a sudden in the tribulation, the earth's going to flatten out into a square and the angels are going to be standing at the corners of the square. He's talking about cardinal directions. He's talking about the north, the south, the east, and the west, the 4 cardinal directions. And he says these 4 angels are standing at the 4 corners of the earth, and he says they're holding back the wind. Now, he tells us in verse 2, or verse 1 really, that the purpose of these angels is they're going to destroy the earth. In the first 6 judgments, it went after a lot of people. A quarter of the earth's population died. There's a lot of geographical destruction, but it's primarily the people. Famine, death, war. Now in the second set, these angels are going to go more after the land, the earth, the trees. And so these angels are standing at the 4 corners of the earth, and they're holding back the 4 winds of the earth so no wind could blow. Why are they doing that? Because if the winds are able to blow, then all the diseases, all the plagues, all those airborne things from those first 6 plagues would blow all over the earth. And it's just not time for that yet. There's a sequence to things. So these angels are holding back the winds. In verse 2, John says, now I see a 5th angel, if you will, come up. And we know that angels are ranked. They have a hierarchy. And so evidently this angel in verse 2 is higher than or superior to the first 4 angels. Look at what John saw. John's watching this unfold. He says, I see another angel ascending from the rising of the sun. The sun rises in the east. So we can call this the angel of the east, the eastern angel. John said, I saw this angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. So he's sealed by God. We don't know what the seal is, but he's holding it in his hand. You don't want to trivialize things. You don't want to make it too elementary, but it's almost like a little stamp that he has. It's a little seal that he's carrying. And it says that he cried to the other 4 angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea. Those angels have this power to harm the land. He says in verse 3, don't harm them yet until we have sealed the bondservants. Don't do anything yet until I seal these. Now these angels are commanded to hold back the destruction until God's servants can be sealed. He hasn't talked about the servants yet. We're about to. But he said, I know you guys are going to have power to destroy the earth and the sea, but I want you to restrain from that until I can seal God's servants. Once I seal God's servants, then you guys will have reign to do your job, to do what you need to do. All right, so now the narrative in Revelation 7 is going to shift to the servants. John said, I saw these angels are holding back the winds on the 4 corners, north, south, east, and west. The 5th angel comes up from the east and says, don't do it yet. I've got to seal these servants. And he has a seal in his hand. Now look at verse 4. Because this is verses 4 through 8. It's probably misapplied. I don't really think it's as misunderstood as it's misapplied. I think it's spiritualized when it doesn't need to be. And I'm talking specifically about Jehovah's Witnesses. They spiritualize this into something that it's not. And so I'm going to try to hopefully maybe share with you what it is. And I'll tell you, just by what I'm about to tell you, will be an argument that you can use when somebody that's teaching you false doctrine, like a Jehovah's Witness, tries to tell you that this means that it's 144,000 of them. So I'll tell you what it really means. Look at verse 4. I heard the number of those who were sealed. The angel said, I've got to seal God's servants. Now John said, I heard that number. I guess they're counting them. I don't know if he just yelled out the number, if he counted them one by one. But John said the number was 144,000. Watch this, sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. There's no Gentiles. These are not Jehovah's Witnesses. These are not Americans that are Gentile. These come from the Jewish faith. These are Jewish believers who have been sealed by God for a special witnessing purpose during the 7 years of tribulation. And hold on to this, because you hear people say this a lot, and I think they mean well, but there's going to be people saved during this tribulation period. Matter of fact, there may be a greater revival here in the tribulation than any other time in the history of mankind. But John said, I hear the number is 144,000, and they're from every tribe of the nation of Israel. Now, watch this, because the list is different. He goes to tell us this list, and it's different than the list you may have heard of from the tribes of Israel. Look at verse 5. From the tribe of Judah, 12,000 were sealed. Judah's in the original list. From the tribe of Reuben, 12,000. From the tribe of Gad, 12,000. The tribe of Asher, 12,000. Tribe of Naphtali, 12,000. Tribe of Manasseh, 12,000. Tribe of Simeon, 12,000. Tribe of Levi, 12,000. He's not in the original. Levi's not. The tribe of Issachar, 12,000. Zebulun, 12,000. Joseph, 12,000. He's not in the original. And then 12,000 from the tribe of Benjamin. So it's 144,000. The list omits the tribe of Dan. You don't see Dan in here. And it's probably because, and most people believe, that the tribe of Dan is omitted from this list of witnesses because of the sin of idolatry. As a matter of fact, if you read some Bible scholars, some people that have really put a lot of research into this, they believe that the false prophet that's mentioned in Revelation chapter 5 will come from the tribe of Dan, because the false prophet will more likely be a Jew, and the Antichrist more likely to be a Gentile. And we'll talk about that later when we get to the specifics of it. But the tribe of Dan is omitted. And then the tribe of Manasseh is here. And if you remember the original tribes, Joseph was removed, and his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, were included in the list. Now, in this list of these witnesses, Manasseh is included, but Ephraim is not. Ephraim probably was omitted for the same reason, probably for idolatry. Matter of fact, if you read Judges chapter 18, you read about some of those idolatrous accounts from these people. So Dan is omitted because of idolatry. Ephraim is omitted possibly because of idolatry. And then Levi is inserted. Now, the reason Levi is not in the original list of the 12 tribes of Israel is because Levi was specifically designated as the priestly class, the priestly tribe. The priests come from the tribe of Levi. So they're taken out of the original 12 tribe list, but now God reinserts them in the tribe of witnesses. And then he included Joseph in here. Joseph is not one of the original 12, because Ephraim and Manasseh, his two sons, took those places. But now Ephraim has been removed, so now the tribe of Joseph looks like it has replaced the idolatrous tribe of his son, Joseph's son, Ephraim. And so when you look at this list, there's a couple of things that specifically jump out and speak to you. The 144,000 are not Jehovah's Witnesses. They're from the tribes of Israel. They're Jewish people that are called by God and sealed by the angel of God for a specific purpose. They have something that they're supposed to do. And so we'll jump down to verse 9, because verse 9 is going to be kind of contraindicated to Jewish belief systems now, but it's what's going to take place during the tribulation. Look at verse 9. After these things, what things? After those 144,000 were sealed. After these things I looked, John said, I looked, and behold, a great multitude, which no one could count, from every nation and all tribes and peoples and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, and palm branches were in their hands. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, Salvation to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. So now there's this great tribe of people, great multitude of people, the Bible says, that are around this throne. In other words, look at who he's talking about. This great multitude, look how he describes them. They're clothed in white robes and they're waving palm branches. So what do they signify for us believers? This is the evidence of, or the results of, the great the revival that's going to take place on direct account of the 144,000 Jewish witnesses. What are they witnessing? Look at verse 10. And they cry out with a loud voice, saying, Salvation to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. So what are they crying out? Salvation belongs to the Lamb. Where'd they get this from? Jewish witnesses. So what does that tell you about the Jewish witnesses? They're Messianic Jewish witnesses. They believe in the Messiah. They believe in Jesus. And so they're going to proclaim the message, and great multitudes of people are going to be saved and going to follow the Lamb. Now look at verse 12. Verse 11. All the angels were standing around, the throne and around the elders and the four living creatures, and they fell on their faces before the throne and worshiped God, saying, this is a great worship service. This is a tremendous worship service that's about to happen because of who Jesus is. Look at verse 12, saying, Amen, blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. Amen. So they are praising the Lord. They're witnessing because of they're testifying because of what they witnessed in those 144,000 witnesses. That is, that the Lamb of God gave them their salvation. So it's a sevenfold worship. Look at the worship. They sing praise, they sing glory, wisdom, thanks, honor, power, and strength. That's in verse 12. That's a sevenfold doxology, or a sevenfold praise regarding who God is. Now, this is look at the wording. The angels are there, the elders are there, the living creatures are there, the multitude is there. So who's involved in this worship service? Everybody in heaven. Everybody in heaven is participating in this worship service because of the salvation of the Lamb. Now, we're going to shift gears in verse 13 and look at a question that's asked, because the question really sets up some really powerful ideas. Look at verse 13. Then one of the elders answered, saying to John, John's witnessing this like we are. John's not. John doesn't have any spiritual insight on this. So look at the question. It's rhetorical. Then one of the elders answered, saying to me, these who are clothed in the white robes, who are they? And where have they come from? And he's not asking that because he doesn't know. John doesn't know. John's a visitor here. John's a spectator on it. John doesn't know. But the angel asks, he already knows. Why is he asking then? Because he wants to make sure everybody else knows. And so he kind of taps John on the shoulder and he says, listen, John, all these in white robes, who are they? Where do all these guys come from? Because he wants the people to know. Now, the answer is in verse 14. He's going to answer his own question. John said, my Lord, you know. John said, I don't know, you know. And he, the angel, said to me, these are the ones who come out of the great tribulation, and they have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. For this reason they are before the throne of God, and they serve him day and night in the temple, and he who sits on the throne will spread his tabernacle over them. his dwelling, his tabernacle, his being. So the angel says, all these in white, taps John on the shoulders, all these in white robes around God's throne, praising God, says, who are they and where did they come from? These are these people. Look at the answer in verse 14. These people come out of the tribulation, and they're saved people. They're clothed in the righteousness of Jesus. They're people. Look at what it talks about, the blood of the Lamb. These are people who trusted in the blood of the Lamb. These are people that, well, actually, let's say it like this. This is a fact that the 144,000 Jewish witnesses do not change their testimony, do not change their message. The message is, it's the blood of the Lamb that saves you. It's Jesus that saves you. And so these 144,000 got the message out so much, this great revival happened where there was this huge multitude of people clothed in white or in the righteousness of Christ. And John said, I see all this. And the angel said, who are they and where they come from? Not that he doesn't know. He wants you and I to know so that there's no false speculation out there, so there's no false teaching going on. These are those who were saved in the tribulation because they believed and they trusted in the Lamb. God does not change his message. This is what they need to, this is, how did the Old Testament people get saved? By faith in God, by faith in the Messiah. They looked forward to the Messiah coming. How do we get saved? By faith in the Messiah. That's how we get saved. We look back on the fact that he came. They look forward, we look backwards. These people are saved the same way. The message is not changed. You get saved because of the blood of the Lamb. Now, verse 15 is a verse of safety. And it's safety for a reason. Look at what it says. For this reason, the multitude, for this reason, why for this reason? Because they came out of the tribulation. There's tribulation saints saved during the tribulation. For this reason, they are before the throne of God, and they serve him day and night in his temple. And he who sits on the throne will spread his tabernacle over them. He'll put his tabernacle over them. His protection over them. Look at verse 16. They will hunger no longer, nor thirst anymore, nor will the sun beat down on them, nor any heat. For the Lamb in the center of the throne will be their shepherd, and will guide them to the springs of water of life. And God will wipe every tear from their eye. Look at what he's talking about here. Because that's another verse that sometimes gets misquoted, misapplied. This is a promise of safety in the presence of God. Because on earth during the tribulation, believers are not safe. These people believed the 144,000 witnesses. Get to chapter 11, we're going to talk about two special witnesses. But these are 144,000 Jewish witnesses that are called to proclaim the message of the Lamb. People that believe the message. Remember, this is now going into the second 3.5 years of the tribulation, is where the Antichrist is really going to punish believers. And so this is a promise of heavenly protection, because on earth there is no protection. On earth they're going to starve. They're going to die of disease. They're going to be murdered. As a matter of fact, there's no way that they can escape the Antichrist while they're on earth. Executions are going to be through the roof. They're just going to be a daily thing. And now, suddenly in heaven, they find themselves in the presence of Christ, face to face with Jesus. They're there. And in verse 16, look what it says about him. Once they enter into heaven, all this multitude of people are on earth, and they believe the witnesses of the 144,000. They get stoned, they get martyred, they get executed, starved to death, put in prison to die of hunger or whatever it is, because of Jesus, because of the cause of believing in Jesus. Now suddenly they find themselves under the umbrella of protection of God in heaven. And look what it says. Once they get to heaven, None of those things will happen anymore. Look at verse 16. Look how it words it. They'll hunger no more, no longer. They'll nor thirst anymore, nor will the sun beat down on them. Once they enter into heaven, they enter into a divine fortress, the tabernacle of God, the protection of God. And so once they enter into the protection of God, they are in a refuge of the Almighty. The Old Testament said God takes up Israel and puts them under his wings like a chicken does with her chicks, a hen does with her chicks. God protects his own. It's a place, heaven is good. This is a description of heaven. It's a place where the constant protection of God can't be beat. It can't be overpowered, can't be breached, can't be thwarted. It's constant protection. And so these multitude of people who gave their life to Jesus during this tribulation period find themselves now under the protection of God in heaven, and they can't help but to stand in front of the throne and sing doxologies to him, glory and praise and dominion. Then look at verse 17. The Lamb will preserve the tribulation saints. The Lamb will protect them. Look what it says here. He'll be their shepherd. He'll guide them to the springs of water of life. God will allow them to eat from the tree of life. God will allow them to drink from fountains of living water. And he tells them that, really, look at the implication of verse 17. God's going to wipe away the tears from their eyes. Then God is implying that they're going to do a good bit of weeping while still on earth. And he says, you guys on earth are not going to know anything but tears and sorrow. The tribulation is going to be bad. You guys are going to be persecuted. You're going to be beaten. You're going to be imprisoned. You're going to be executed. You're going to watch your friends be executed. And he says, you're going to shed a lot of tears. It's going to be a lot of weeping, a lot of sorrow. Incredibly harsh living conditions. Some of them are going to starve. Some of them are going to thirst to death. Some of them are going to be terrorized. Some of them are going to have their loved ones killed right in front of them. Brutal, horrible living conditions. And there's going to be reason for tears to fall. There's going to be a reason why they're crying. There's going to be a reason why they're weeping. Look at verse 17. We get into the presence of God. Get into heaven under the protection of God. And God's going to wipe away every tear from our eye. There's no more death, no more dying, no more hunger, no more thirst, no more jealousy, no more wars, no more envy, no more strife, no more troubles, no more diseases. All the weeping that's going to be done, God's going to wipe those tears away. Now, you and I as believers will not be here then. We'll be in heaven where John is currently witnessing all this at. And I believe, and we're going to get to this a little bit later, I believe that during this 7 years tribulation, you and I will be before the judgment seat of Christ, the bema seat of judgment. During the 7 years that all this is going on earth, I believe that believers will be standing before God himself, giving an account for the deeds that we do in our bodies. I think that's how we're going to be spending this time. And guess what? You're probably going to be crying too. When everything is revealed, all your motives, all your deeds, your heart attitudes, there's going to be some weeping that takes place. Don't you think? For me personally, I'm sure there will be. But then God's going to wipe away all tears from our eyes. There's no more hurt, no more regret, no more of those things. So John said, I see the judgments being poured out. There's 6 seals that are opened. And then there's an interlude, there's a parenthesis before the 7th seal opens the 7 trumpets. John said the reason for this parenthesis is that I saw this angelic activity where these servants were sealed, 144,000 Jews from those 12 tribes of Israel, and their purpose was to go out and preach about the blood of the Lamb. preach about Jesus, about his sacrifice. And this great multitude of people turned to Christ during the tribulation period. Now John says, I see them in heaven. They're under the protection of God because they didn't get protection on earth, being believers under the Antichrist rule. So when somebody tells you these 144,000 are Jehovah's Witnesses that are promised paradise or something, that's not what this says. Occam's razor, the simplest explanation is best. A literal interpretation. Look what it said. There are 144,000 from the tribes. 12,000 from each tribe. That's pretty simple. There's no gray area here. So that's what he's talking about. And then they're called to proclaim the message of the Lamb. That's what they're preaching. That's what they're teaching. In other words, it's the gospel. And then the end is the reward in heaven. Now look at verse 8, chapter 8, and we'll pick up this next week, but look at verse 8, verse 1. I want you to study on this for the next week. When the Lamb broke the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. So the first 6 seals are opened. All this judgment, a quarter of the world's population is killed. And then John sees these 144,000 witnesses sealed by the seal of God. And then they go out and witness until this great multitude of people come to Christ. And then John said, okay, now let's get back to these seals. I see the 7th seal open. And the 7th seal, when it's open, John says, evidently there's something so monumental that's about to take place that there's a pause in heaven. There's silence in heaven for a little bit. All this praise, all this doxology that's going on, they're praising God, glory, glory, holy, holy, holy. All this stops for about 30 minutes because there's going to be such fury unleashed on earth. Heaven is going to pause itself, I guess, to kind of collect itself. So chapter 4 and 5 is a heavenly scene. Chapter 6 is the seal judgments, which is an earthly scene. Chapter 7 is a parenthesis, which introduces us to the witnesses and starts the next phase of judgment. Now chapter 8 is going to be back to an earthly scene where we see the judgments on basically creation. So I hope you're able to follow this along and read along in this, and it's not as difficult as I think some people make it out to interpret. It can be read fairly straightforward, and God has actually promised us a blessing if we read it and do what it says. So God is not really capricious in that way to give us instructions that, hey, if you can read this and do what it says, I'll bless you, but then make it so we can't understand it. So I think it's understandable. I think we just have to look at it from the point of view that John is writing from the first century about things that he has no words for, he has no vocabulary for. So he's trying the best he can to describe these things. You and I just now have to kind of pick up what he's putting down and try to put some futuristic context to it that, in our present that John didn't have in the first century. So next week we'll pick up with chapter 8. And we'll do the 7th seal, and it'll open the trumpet judgment, and we'll start looking at the trumpet judgments. And I told you, as the closer we get to the parousia, or the second coming of Jesus in chapter 19, the more intense, the closer these get together, and the more intense they get. So the destruction is going to ramp up, the death count is going to mount up. It's going to get worse and worse before it gets better. Hopefully I'll see you Sunday morning. We do have social distance in place best we can. We've got one section that if you want to wear a mask and you want to separate, we've got a section for you. We've got no materials are being passed out. No offering plates are being passed out. We're not handing anything out. We're trying to keep you as safe as possible. So if you feel comfortable, you're more than welcome to come be with us at 10:15 on Sunday morning. If you're not comfortable, watch us on Facebook Live. We're so blessed that we have a team of people that put our services online, and you guys know who you are, and I appreciate what you do. So tune in, watch us, listen to our worship band. They're fantastic. If I do say so myself, I'm a little biased, but they're fantastic. They're going to lead you to the throne of worship. And then Sunday, we're going to start a new series called The Wisest of Fools. And we're going to cover the life of Solomon for 4 or 5 weeks and look at Solomon's life and see how somebody with such a gift that Solomon received could go so horribly wrong in the end. So please be with us if you can on Sundays, and then Wednesday night, 6:30, and we'll pick up with Revelation chapter 8. So in the meantime, God bless you, and we appreciate all you guys watching. Have a great night.